I mean, there's lots of great things that the organisation does.
How important is having a diverse team and workforce?
That's one of the reasons that attracted me to join the organisation.
Delighted to have Sámi Ben Ali, Inclusive Experience and Technologies and Amazon, with us here today. Going to jump straight in.
Yeah.
What are the? Tell me about Inclusive Experiences and Technologies. What is that role all about?
Okay, so my background is very much HR, people and culture, and that has been my background very much in the ED&I space and the Inclusive Experiences and Technology team that I'm part of at Amazon. In the simplest form, is about creating a fair and an equal workplace where people can show up as their best selves, create a healthy environment. And part of my role is looking at tools and systems to see how well we're doing, what areas we could look to develop and improve. And really it's about creating a workforce for everyone and working internally, but also with customers and communities as well.
There's a lot of data and analytics and people analytics as well.
Yeah, it's really it's an interesting role. We're obviously at the crossroads with technology, but had that impact on people and from a cultural perspective, how is what we're doing enabling people? So it could be anything from looking at retention data to promotion data to how we are engaging in relation to social impact with customers and communities, to how do we celebrate difference, how do we educate difference, how learning and development. There's the whole raft of an employee life cycle as well to think of. So it's a far wide and varied role, and one of the reasons why I love it.
So, I mean, with all the talk about technology, I mean, what have been the biggest disruptions in technology for you at Amazon, and also how does that impact what you do in order to deliver these services for your workforce?
You probably heard this a lot, and no doubt the viewers and the listeners will no doubt jump to in terms of AI and Gen AI and really the advances and the developments over the past 12 months. We've certainly seen that impact within our organisation, inside and outside. So really that impact from a people perspective, understanding the technology, certainly someone who I consider myself non-technical. It's about understanding what does it mean? What does that mean for my role? And I think a lot of people, what does that mean for me as individuals? I think a lot of people resonate with that. And so in turn, what does that mean for the workforce? What does that mean for organisations? And then how do organisations respond and adapt, as well as individuals? So, and I've certainly had to learn and adapt, and that's the journey that I've been on the past 12 months. And that is also a knock-on effect from a technology point of view, but then the creep into the social economic impact of what we're seeing from a social media point of view, political climate. So there's been lots of that over the past 12 months, and really from a well-being point of view, that they are really sort of the biggest topics that have been, certainly from my point of view, over the past 12 months, in my opinion.
I mean, you've had a long and varied career, within EDI, diversity, equity, inclusion. You've worked at global organizations. I mean, Amazon, don't get much more global than that. But in terms of, how do you foster a culture of adoption through this innovation?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and one question that probably everyone asks themselves. Certainly, I think it from organizations, it very much starts with leadership. I'm lucky to work at an organisation where we have very clear and defined leadership principles. The 16, no doubt a lot of people will already know about them. You can go and view them, but that really is the DNA and fabric of the organisation. And so I can name a few where that lends itself well to creating that culture of innovation that you mentioned. One of the leadership principles is learn and be curious. Everyone is encouraged to learn about new things, be curious about things they might not know. Very much from the mindset as well, personally, of if you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably in the wrong room. It's always be good to be learning from people. That's one of the reasons that attracted me to join the organisation. We've also got Dive Deep, which again is really digging in and understanding a subject matter, no matter what it might be. There's also think big. There's strive to be Earth best employer. I mean, like I say, there's 16, but they are leadership principles that I've never worked in an organisation where everyone references them, religiously. Everyone lives by them, and you can see that from the leadership all the way down. And it's embraced to experiment and innovate, and that level of psychological safety to go, I don't really know much about this, but I'm going to try. And it's lucky to be in an organisation. If you're not in an organisation, there's different ways of learning. So I'm fortunate that we've got some of the cutting edge, world leading people in some of these fields, as well as in my own area and organisation. But it's having that appetite to want to learn and seeing other people that are willing to be a bit vulnerable to say that they don't know and they don't have the answers necessarily, but they are also learning.
Is that actively encouraged in terms of, just being open with what you do know and what you don't know?
Personally, in my opinion, yeah, absolutely. It's very much if we talk to AI and Gen AI and a lot of what's been getting spoken about at the moment, if people are saying that they know where we're going to be and what it's going to look like in the next even 18 months, never mind 5 years, I think it's best guess at that. So it's about embracing the unknown and being okay with that, and realizing it's taking steps to understand the principles and the basics. So personally, I've looked to take certification and knowledge over the past 4 months. I've really looked to say, okay, I can either be shaped by this, almost let it be done to me, or I can look to embrace it, understand what it means for me in my domain, and then almost look to get a bit ahead of it. Because I remember watching a video someone said, and it really resonated, saying, a lot of people are saying, is AI, for example, going to take my role? And they said, probably won't take your role, but someone who is using AI will probably take your role. So I thought, okay, it's a good way of looking at it. So going back to the culture of innovation, and it, again, a leadership principle is that of ownership and owning your own career, and really not seeing it as a risk, but almost like it's part of learning.
But as a leader and having teams that you manage and run, are you actively encouraging your teams to are you leading by example?
I think you'd have to ask them, but I'd like to say so. I'm a big fan of democratized learning, and so I'm lucky to be surrounded by people where it's not hoarding that knowledge and experience. People are constantly sharing, and I think people get fed up with me, the amount of TED Talks or YouTube videos or podcasts that I constantly share, going, right, you need to get onto this, take 20 minutes aside to read about this, or this book's good, and really look to, and some of it you think, well, that doesn't really resonate with me, that doesn't make much sense. But what I try to do is say, listen, if I can do it, anyone can do it. And so I became Gen AI certified within AWS, and I'm a non-technical person. And so from that point of view, I've looked to lead by example in my department to say, listen, if I can do it as a non-tech person, all these other tech people are doing it as well, we need to understand, because what I've looked to learn quite quickly is everyone's got a specialism, a domain knowledge. And so things like technology and Gen AI, they're only as good and as useful by utilizing your own domain knowledge and specialism. And so how I've tried to describe that, for example, to some of my HR colleagues, is with some of these Gen AI tools. Say the tool, and I'm making it up now, say the tool makes knives. Depending on your domain knowledge and what you do will depend on the kind of knife that you need. So if you're a surgeon, you'll need a different knife to a chef, to a samurai, to someone who's chopping down trees. Will then all depend on what you're wanting that tool to do. And so it's what I've been trying to do by lead from example is learn and be curious from a leadership principle, but break it down into language that I can understand well enough to then bring other people on board and into it so that everyone benefits. And I read a really good quote around the printing press democratized, sort of learning and books, and cameras democratized, access to photographs, and then AI is democratizing access to being more creative. For me, if you put it more in the hands of people, we're going to get some really great ideas and hopefully solve some of, the world's biggest problems.
You mentioned, enabling, creating spaces where people can be their true selves. I mean, as a leader, how important is having a diverse team and workforce? How important is that to you?
Personally, to me, in my opinion, it's massively important. I think that's where I've really seen some of the best teams go to work, in terms of solving some really hard challenges and issues. And the thing is, in my opinion, again, when people speak to diversity, sometimes people tend to go towards, more visible characteristics than the invisible. And for me, diversity comes in all sorts of shapes, sizes. There's obviously lots of talk around neurodiversity now, and has been for a while, rightly so. There's elements of diversity such as social mobility, as well as, characteristics around sex, race, gender, etc., etc. For me, it's individuals always bring something to the table, the proverbial table, whether it be virtual or in person. But you need to have that environment where people will take a risk in communication to be able to put forward an idea or a way of looking at something. And once you start to see that, you even start to see it in television programs. Traitors, is a prime example in terms of people making split decisions, but at the same time, people having some great ideas and insights that are being brought into conversations. I always use an example of Bear Grylls. I remember watching his program 9 or 10 years ago, The Island, where it was a fascinating insight into someone who, they all land on a beach and they're all introducing themselves. And, this one person said, I'm ex-military. They all high-fiving each other and whooping. Project manager, got the same cheer. Doctor, cheer. And then this young lad said, I'm a software developer. And everyone was a bit like, oh, God, how are you going to help us survive on this island? And I always use this example because they were put to task. And you can just imagine any team in any environment. It's almost like, well, whoever speaks the loudest, or you look at the CV, or you think, right, you're going to be the most useful on this. Their roles at the time was to build camp, and the main thing was build a fire so they could purify water or cook or to have heat. And this young lad was sent off to the forest with some others to just go and fetch the wood, while these other people that were almost self-selected were trying to make the fire, and they were really struggling because they had no equipment to do it with. Anyway, cut a long story short, the young lad came over because he realised he wasn't going to have any food or heat if they didn't light this fire. And he offered up his glasses, to use his glasses from the sun to light a fire. And for me, that was that diversity of thought on the spot. And I thought it was a great example where there wasn't an inclusive environment. It was almost like, yeah, hiya, nice to meet you, but can you go off and do another task actually, because we're trying to get on with something really important. Yeah, he was the one that could solve that problem. And if you think about that in a corporate corporate environment, if you don't have an inclusive environment, you could be missing out on all these like golden nuggets of innovation or ideas or problem solving. And you might not on face value understand that these people, whoever it might be, could have that within their head or whatever.
Have there been any challenges through this tech innovation that you were able to share with us, where you were able to solve by bringing in these kind of different views and ideas?
What I find interesting and where I see it really play out is when it's less around a task and more individuals getting to know each other almost on a more of a social basis and realizing we've got more in common than not. And then what tends to happen is relationships for me get built and forged. And that's when people get the most from diving into a task. And so I've seen where teams have come together in my previous career in bids, for example, where you're looking to win work and you might have the commercial folk with the technical folk with more people orientated, and then you realize that everyone's adding their own bit in their own expertise and their own specific domain, whether it be right, okay, on this bid, this is the people section, so obviously you'd want to bring HR, L&D, etc. but then realize that the commercial folk could have a really good input to say, okay, well, how I think this from my experience. It won't necessarily been their professional experience, but they've said, well, I had this experience of learning and development, or this experience with HR, and I think that we could do it better. And so it's almost like 360 feedback. There was a great example I heard about last week with an organisation, and they were talking about they were having problems on the production line where it was soap in soap boxes. They were leaving the warehouse facility, but some of the boxes then didn't have soap in them, so they were obviously getting lots of complaints. So they basically proposed that they were going to invest a huge amount of money on X-ray machines on the production line to make sure that there was soap inside the box. And so that was what the engineering technical team decided that they were going to do. But what they wanted to do is run it past the rest of the company to say, is there any cheaper solutions that we could think of? And it was someone that wasn't in the technical department that said, well, that's a lot of money that we're investing to X-ray these boxes to see if they're empty or not. Why don't we just set up a load of fans next to the production line, keep them on, and then if the boxes are empty, they'll fly off the production line and we'll know there's no soap in them. And it was just a brilliant, again, it was about that engagement, bringing them in, a level of inclusion to say, okay, we want to hear everyone's ideas and voices, and obviously save that company a lot of money with a much, much simpler solution. But I know there's no doubt within my own organisation, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands of examples of that.
I was going to make a really cheap joke around ordering and getting next day delivery, but but in terms of, we talk about Amazon, stratospheric, it's out there, it's big. Companies, SMEs, those organizations that are on their journey to growth and looking at ways of using technology to get the best out of people, to create efficiencies. I mean, what advice could you give to those organizations that don't have huge budgets, are busy trying to make their company successful and profitable? What kind of, through your experience over the years, what could you share that could help business leaders?
I think culture is so important. I think it might be overused, but that ability to embrace failure and to accept that that's part of the process, and for people to not be fearful that if I fail, that's a bad thing. It's a failure is part of the process to innovating and improving and getting better. So I think from a leadership point of view, to give that, again, I say it's psychological safety, or to almost give that nod and seal of approval to say, experiment, if we're talking about technology, put it in the hands of the people that work for you, but allow them to embrace it without fear of failure, but to learn from that quickly. It's not to say, right, just go up, but do it with intent. And I think from leaders to but really to role model those behaviors, that again, that vulnerability to say, I haven't got the answers. We're relying on each other to come up with the solutions. Because if you look at, I think throughout history in terms of innovations, I think a lot of people seem to think it just comes from the mind of that one person. It's an aha moment. But if you actually really study a lot of inventions, it's iterations on other people's ideas. It never tends to come from one person that just creates it in isolation. It's usually a build upon you saying, well, I've got this idea and I think this, and for me to go and feel comfortable enough to possibly challenge you might be my manager, but to go, well, Miraj, what about this? In my experience, X, Y, and Z, and you go, okay, and so we're almost like riffing off each other. But if I don't feel like I've got that relationship, or that's the culture within our organization, I could have a great idea, but I don't feel confident enough or motivated enough to go, I want to help solve this. So, but it's got to be that thread within from a strategic lens as well, because otherwise you could almost be off being busy fools. Everyone's just off doing what they want, which, what a wonderful world. But at the same time, as an organisation, especially if you've not got the resources or the budget, it needs to be with intention. But for me, it's that culture, and it's hard to work at it. But once you get it right, you can really see it pay off.
With any kind of tech innovation, there's always going to be kind of social and challenges around sustainability and energy. And what can you share with us in terms of what Amazon has been doing in this space to take into account the fact that there's lots of consumption?
It's interesting. As an organisation, we're doing a lot, and previous organisations, environmental and social challenges are always something that I'm passionate about, and it's always been positive to understand, certainly from the company that I'm working at the moment, what we're doing. Again, I've spoke a lot around education, but interestingly, from a sustainability point of view and environmental point of view, there's things that I've learnt, again, that are out in the public domain. 100% of energy consumption in 2023 was renewable energy, which I thought was phenomenal. There's also a climate pledge for net zero carbon emissions by 2040, which is, I think, it's 10 years ahead of the Paris Climate Agreement. There was 75% reduction in food waste in the European operations. This all came out in the 2023 sustainability report, which is great as an employee to go, okay, this is because the impact that we're having. There's a big push around volunteerism. Certainly working for organisations that have a social impact. And again, I mentioned there's a leadership principle around striving to be Earth's best employer, but one of the other leadership principles is broad responsibility as an organisation. And from an educational point of view in technology, there's lots of free learning out there that certainly Amazon and AWS do. I think it's about 600 free courses. So as a leader of a business or someone who's interested in anything from machine learning to Gen AI to cloud to solutions architecture to network infrastructure.
So these training courses are available to anyone in the public domain?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of free courses, and then if people wanted to take it more seriously and become certified, you can then look to register, do the learning, and then if you want to put in for an exam, you can then get certified in these things as well, which I think is phenomenal. And there's 31 million people, I think I read yesterday, have access to learning.
Right, okay.
And there's been 100 million pledge recently in terms of education.
We'll get the link for that as well then and put it in our comments.
So there's plenty out there to be able to learn, but irrespective of that, for me, that's something that I'm passionate about. There's things I do outside of my organisation that are around social environmental impact. I think there's more people looking for more mission driven work, whether it be in professional or personal life. So yeah, for me that's important. But yeah, absolutely, this question's always been asked, and rightly so.
Just going back to that culture within Amazon and you creating inclusive technology solutions for people and workforce and also customers as well. Can you give us an insight into how you're dealing and working with very talented technologists? And and just that, I'm a big fan of human-centered design process, but I'm really keen to understand how, what does it? Give us a little peek into how you're dealing with technologists to come up with these kind of solutions.
I think a lot of the magic or the secret sauce is where it is out in the public domain. That it's very. There's lots of great things that the organisation does, and one of the key elements is the doc writing culture that we have. For those not aware, we don't use PowerPoint presentations to get ideas across. It's very much from Jeff Bezos, from inception as an organisation, is very much being skilled in writing and being clear and concise in your thinking. And what that does as a tool, there's different types of documents. There's one called a press release, frequently asked questions, which is a PRFAQ, which is you write the idea or the product as if it's been launched. And so you write it as, I've created this is what it's done, this is how it's been received. And then you write a load of frequently asked questions that you are preempting the questions that are going to come from, whether it be about the product or how it's been received. So what that then does is almost a working back from the product launch, which is a different way of thinking. And what the dot writing culture also does, and what I'm a fan of from being from an inclusion background, is everyone gets the same information. So from a practical point of view, I'll write a document, and the document will be in a specific format, and you'll have numbered lines. So every single line is numbered. And so one of the first calls I went on, it took me aback, because the first 20 minutes of an hour call is silence, cameras off, because it was virtual at the time, reading a document. And so what that does is it forces everyone's thinking, that everyone's reading the same document, and you can then have your comments or ideas based on that document for when we're finished after 20 minutes, or you can write it in the document there. But one of the great comments from Jeff Bezos and a lot of the leadership have said before is he loves a crisp document and a messy meeting. And so everyone comes off and everyone then discusses that document. And from a leadership point of view as well, the senior leader 9 times out of 10 is the last one to speak, because they don't want to influence what other possible junior folks on the call might want to think. So again, it's that innovation, diversity of thought, inclusion, all wrapped in. So you've got a mechanism of a document that everyone's reading, whereas with slides, if I'm a good salesman with the slides, I've done it before. I put bullet points up, I run through them. I think I know it makes sense, but I'm presenting the slides to you, and then someone else, you might get a totally different message from what I'm trying to present. What the documents do is very clear and concise, and there's also a decision needed at the end. It's almost like, what is this, the purpose of it? And anyone in the organization can write a doc. So you're putting it into people's hands. There's a way of writing, there's different types of docs, but for me, it's a brilliant example of everyone's got the same information. And again, it's how you're interpreting that information. You might come up with a gold nugget to go, well, on line 36, you say X, what does that mean? Or I think this could be, so you're almost getting, again, the crisp document, but the messy meeting. And for me, that's one of the sort of standout secret
That was
sources.
one of the early kind of induction processes that you go through as an employee.
Yeah, learning how to write. So, there's a style of writing. And so you join an organization, you think, well, I know how to write. But really, I've really had to flex that muscle, understand how to write really concisely, and really making me think about what it is I'm trying to say, and why am I using 5 sentences when I can use 2. And I might have people from different cultures, countries and backgrounds also on the call, so I need to make sure it's clear and concise. And I remember one of my first managers gave me a great bit of advice saying, you should be able to take this doc, give it to your mum, and your mum should be able to understand roughly what it is you're talking about, and not have to work in the department. I thought, right, okay, I get it.
That's fascinating, from just rethinking how to do, the pitch, the sales, and just getting people on board really more than anything.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the messy meeting as well. So in terms of your role then, and how, as a leader, we're talking about AI, we're talking about Gen AI, so much is happening. What emerging trends and what are you seeing in terms of what's happening generally in the industry, but also that will impact what you do and undoubtedly what other organizations will have to grapple with as well?
Yeah, I think I wish I did know, because that, I would, I think seeing to the future, I'd be right ahead of it now. It's almost having like the almanac, isn't it, and Back to the Future. But the way I've tried to see it, and I'm really immersing myself in terms of what people are saying, getting different viewpoints, even view from folks I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but just understanding, what their fears, why they're thinking the way they do, really flexing the critical thinking element. What I've tended to shape my thoughts, a couple of things. There's roles that exist now that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. The role I'm in. social media manager, content managers, CTOs, machine learning engineer, data, roles that a lot of companies have now. You just think 10, 15 years, they didn't necessarily exist in their current guise. So what I think will happen is certain roles will be either automated or sped up, made quicker. But what that will then do is produce roles that we might not even understand and exist and appear, as it were. And interestingly, I took my CV and background and put it into a Gen AI tool and said, what kind of roles do you think might exist? And so there's things such as AI ethics, almost like force for good type roles. There's L&D AI learning. So it was almost like a spin on taking my skills but adding it with AI. But I understand from possibly outside of the industry, some organizations or some industries are going to be more heavily impacted than others. I think every industry will be impacted in some shape or form. But I err on the optimistic side that I think it will also present a lot of opportunities. And what I'm hopeful for, in my own personal opinion, is a lot of tasks and roles that mundane is probably the wrong word, but aren't necessarily getting people jumping out of bed and excited, might be more replaced and take over, which then frees up humans to focus on the more passionate value add, using skills that can't be replicated as easily. The emotional intelligence, the empathy, the teamwork, the communication, that won't necessarily straight away certainly be influenced or taken away as quickly as automation or certainly in sort of the machine learning area and the creative space. Again, I saw a good interview with Ben Affleck. I think it was him. He got asked a question around the impact on the film industry, and his answer was superb because he broke it down into which parts of the film industry you think will be really impacted, which is more the sort of CGI type space, which will, in terms of the cost, will come right down, but that will then free up and create other types of roles that won't be as easy to replicate, but will create almost a new market. And so, I think with these things, we are going through a massive change. It's more on the sort of industrial revolution scale, I think, more than when the internet arrived, and that was a big shift. But I think the most important thing at the moment is trying to get it into the right hands and in everyone's hands, that everyone has got access, and that's an easier thing said than done. But from my background, I'm very much around democratized learning. For me, talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And I think there's lots of talent. If you put this in the right hands, I think we'll see some amazing creations and innovations come that might not have happened without this technology. But I mean, I'm not naive that there's lots of risk and threat as well. That people far more closer to it and cleverer than I am understand.
What advice can you give to business leaders who need to service a customer base that is wide-ranging and diverse?
I think it's about leaning into places that might not necessarily become apparent. And what I mean by that is talking with customers, understanding their needs, because a lot of the time that'll guide what customers are thinking about and working backwards from those needs. But then there's a colleague of mine that says, make a friend. And what they mean by that is if you don't know, make a friend. And it's if someone is different to you, you suddenly get a whole other perspective and a whole other viewpoint on something. And so what I tend to try and encourage people to do is things like social media and again, podcasts, is listen to people you wouldn't necessarily even dream about thinking. You might not necessarily even agree with them, whether it be their political standpoint or their topic. But what that then does is, one, challenges your own thinking, but two, then opens up, oh, well, I never even thought of that actually. And then again, it's that iteration on innovation. You're not necessarily, it's that saying, you don't know what you don't know. So if you're constantly in that space, it's really hard, because then you're like, well, unless someone brings it into view, even that slightly into view, you're never going to be aware of it. So you're just going to be on that same track. You're going to be in that same industry or that same revenue stream or same strategy. Unless you know something else, why would you? So for me, it's networking. If you're not aware of it, do they know someone who is? Do you speak to your workforce? Who do we know that could come in and run a session on Gen AI, on the tools? Who can come in and explain it in layman's term? I always say, if you can't explain something simple enough, you don't know it well enough. So, reach out to people to say, okay, listen, I'm looking for X. Do you know anyone? X, Y, and Z. And for me, it's that challenging and moving that thinking, because it is hard, and especially for small, medium enterprises, where I consider myself lucky working in global multinational organizations. There's a much bigger talent pool from which to talk into. Okay, right, we want to attract talent from here. Who knows people in this part of the world or this country? What do we need to be aware of? What about in this region? Who are the main people I should be speaking to, or education institutes, and use I don't know, government bodies, things like that. Yeah.
Final question. So in terms of we're in Europe's fastest growing tech hub right now, and we've got lots of startups, lots of innovation, government announcements around focus on investments in and around AI. So what 3 things could you, based on your experience, advise, or not even top tips that you could give to a business leader in terms of making sure their organization is from the get-go set up in the right way?
The obvious things are making sure you're active on social channels, LinkedIn, get connected to people. You don't necessarily have to connect them, even follow them. They could be everything from world leaders to more regional leaders, and then understand who they're engaging with and who they're promoting. Subscribe to newsletters, subscribe to podcasts. There's plenty out there. I could name about 5, 10 off the top of my head probably.
We'll get a list and put them at the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's getting added to all the time. Your BD team. What is it you're missing or lacking? Or also, what are you also not understanding about your wider team? There'll be skill sets, not necessarily knowledge. For me, big distinction between skills and knowledge is almost getting that breakdown within your organization of what are the skills, because you can build the knowledge. The knowledge will come from your newsletters, your podcasts, your courses, reading books. You can build the knowledge. The skills is what will help you accelerate. Have you got people with amazing skills to be able to learn and unlearn, who can communicate effectively, who can build relationships, who can bring people in to run sessions for you? And so for me is that, again, heavily work on that culture so that people will bring, I was speaking to such and such, I've done this learning, I saw this article, I see that this is coming, and really just almost surround yourself and immerse yourself, and just treat this like it is such a pivotal moment in time that nothing's going to be as worse from a tech point of view than it is right now. It's just going to constantly get better and better. So don't worry if you're only getting involved in it now. We're still very, very early stages, and I'm speaking to people that are at the cutting edge of this, and they keep saying, no, there is no better time to be getting involved. And don't worry if people aren't involved now, because it's still very, very much at the early stages. And the sooner you get adoption of learning, building up those skills, the more that'll pay off in the longer term.
Sámi Ben-Ali, Inclusive Experiences and Technologies at Amazon. Thank you so much for your time today and sharing some of your insight, your experiences, and giving us those top tips as well.
No problem. Thanks for having me.